I can't remember why we were going to the store, the Briar Hill store, about 4 blocks from our house in Calgary. I was with my bestie Brian. I think we just finished playing tetherball, and we were going to buy a Coke. As we rounded the corner, there was Richard Bailey with a group of friends. He was a former classmate, and I didn't know any of those friends, and that made sense because Richard had transferred schools the year before. And Richard called us over. He said, "Hey, Blair, how you doing?" And I didn't think about it. He called us over, and I didn't think anything of it. But Richard had already planned his strategy to humiliate my friend Brian. They held us from behind, and Richard punched me in the stomach, and they punched Brian in the stomach, and they whacked us upside the head. They forced us down on hands and knees and rode us like donkeys, making donkey sounds and smacking our butts. They pushed us down, pinned us to the ground, heads up, and they stuck cigarettes in our mouths, forcing us to draw on cigarettes. And I don't think it lasted more than 10 minutes. They all ran off. And Brian and I lay there for a second. We went to buy our Coke, and we trembled. We were silent, and then we walked and talked for hours, just trying to lick our wounds. Crazy thing was that 4 weeks later, my mom sent me to the store, the same store, for smokes. We were at our neighbor's house, and they were visiting, and she went to grab a smoke, and her pack was empty. And she said, "Would you run to the store and get me some smokes?" And I did. So I was round in the corner, and there was Richard Bailey and his friends again. And he called me over, and this time I snuck in and bought my mother's Craven menthols, and we could do that then as teenagers. As I left the store, I snuck out. He called me over again, and I said no, and turned and started to walk faster. One of his friends began walking faster after me, and I bolted and ran. I ran faster than I ever ran before. It's the first time I ever outran anybody. I crossed a very busy street, down the back hallway, a back laneway, hit our neighbor's gate, ran into the door. I turned around. He chased me all the way to the gate. I ran in. I was out of breath. My mom said, "What are you doing out of breath?" I said, "I just wanted to run home." I never told her. I don't think Brian ever told anybody either. And here's the thing. When we have to do ministry integrative papers, why do you want to be in ministry? Tell us the story of your life. We have to write this every time we turn around, right? Every time you turn around, somebody wants to know the story of your life to test whether you're ready for ministry. And the Richard Bailey event always got written. I recorded it as the most traumatic event of my early life. Yet I'd been teased as a kid, but I'd never been physically abused. I'm sure you know I'm not alone. I bet if we took the risk and entered into a time of sharing, each of us could name the worst day of our lives. I bet you're going there right now. I bet there's a physiological response in your body when you feel freaked out and afraid and completely helpless. You're there right now, right? And your body's going nuts. I bet I'm not alone. So I can't imagine what was going on inside Christy Ford's body on Thursday morning. As she had to testify to the worst day of her life, to a group of people for whom her integrity was in question, with testifying to a group of men, some who believed that it was okay for boys to be boys. I wonder how many integrative papers she's had to write. And the Brett Kavanaugh event is the thing she still writes down. I wonder if she'll ever be free from it. I wonder if she will wake up one day and it will be in a distant memory. When your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. I'm going to take a little time to say what I think needs to be said from Christian pulpits around the world this morning. So bear with me. The text that Carol read from Mark's Gospel is a text about leadership. You see, what had happened just prior to this pericope, this clip, was the disciples were jockeying for position. Who wants to be first? Who's going to be second in command? And Jesus said, last shall be first. And if you really want to enter the kingdom of heaven, do it like a child. When your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Because it's better to enter the kingdom of heaven with one hand than to walk around with two hands and be thrown into fire. Some scholars believe that this is a direct point at leadership particularly, but pointing to the abuse of children in the time of Mark, particularly sexual abuse. Children were sexual commodities at the time of Mark. William Loader from the University of Australia, who teaches and preaches in the Uniting Church of Australia, supports that argument by saying every one of those images, feet, hands, feet, eyes, are sexual references. They're biblical sexual references. And this text is talking about the sexualization of the human body, particularly children. And the salt image? The salt image is about wisdom. Saltiness is a kind of a metaphor for wisdom, for leaders to exercise their wisdom. If salt loses its saltiness, if leaders aren't wise, then how does it offer full flavor? How does it become tinged with spice and fullness? If leaders lose their saltiness. This is a text that says you don't get to do that. And when it happens, leaders speak up. That's what this text is about. You might think it's hyperbole, exaggeration. It isn't. So, just in case, people like Brett Kavanaugh and Donald Trump and Harvey Weinstein and Jian Ghomeshi and all the others that are showing up by women finding their voices, in case they didn't hear the message. You don't get to do this. And it's men who need to say it. You don't get to do this. And if you are accused, abusers, if that happens, abusers, the game changes. Wake up. Go inside. Steal away from the outside voices that are politically and professionally motivated. Because guess what? All of that's gone now. Go inside and ask yourselves the question, how is it possible that this is landing on me? How is it possible, Brett Kavanaugh might ask in the secret recesses of his heart, how is it possible that that beautiful woman, broken on that bench, is accusing me? How is that possible? The game changed for him. And it needs to. The sexual abuse policy of the United Church of Canada is super clear. if there's any sniff, hint, whiff of sexual wrongdoing, even as something tender and beautiful and innocent, like a clergy person falling in love with one of his or her congregants, that is an abuse of power. And the church's response is swift. You are removed until the allegations are disproved. Yes, you heard me. Guilty until proven innocent. Kavanaugh, let me be clear. Kavanaugh needs to find a new job, regardless of the outcome of this. He needs to recuse himself. You know, I actually know what it feels like to be discounted, to feel like my voice is not heard, and to feel some rage inside me because I'm misunderstood. I know what that feels like. Especially at the times when I think I'm most right and the stakes are super high. I actually know what that feels like. I can understand how Kavanaugh could have felt a profound injustice on Thursday, leading to the adolescent displays of unglued emotion. I recognized myself in him. I wonder if some of us did too. But sometimes you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice but to change courses and make a different move in the interest of something bigger than yourself. Here's a simple and painful example. I grew up in a home where discipline could have been a wooden spoon or a leather belt to the butt. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Right? So, one night when my 2-year-old son Jordan would not go to bed, there was that night. He bounced in his bed, as he always did. People used to tell us that Jordan had a beautiful butt. It's because he bounced up and down. That's what he did, from the time he could walk. His mom was off to her at her night job at the gift shop in the mall. And I'd had a biatch of a day with an emotional, abusive boss. So after pleading, cajoling, bribing, and threatening my 2-year-old, I whacked him on the bum. Of course, he's covered in a diaper. Probably couldn't feel anything, except that he did. I smacked him. The next morning when he woke up, I peeled off his little pajamas, and on the back of his thigh was the place where one of my fingers slipped off the diaper and hit his thigh. There was a little faint bruise in the shape of my fingers. I was horrified. Me, that I could do that to a 2-year-old. The text became very real. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. I wanted to cut my own hand off. To this, from that day to this, the only person who knows this is my ex-wife. And from that day to this, I have railed against capital punishment as an effective form of behavior adjustment. Sometimes We have to say, the values I got in my family were wrong. And we have to make a change. This sermon series is about what Christians believe about certain things in doctrine. And today we're talking about sin, through the lens of leadership development in Mark's gospel. Sin is not a litany of wrongdoing. Oh, for Pete's sake, we're human. Sin is not a personal slight against somebody. Sin is not loving someone who doesn't fit the status quo. That is not sin. If I were to unpack each of the deadly sins recorded in the Bible, pride, envy, gluttony, lust, anger, greed, sloth, that's the top 7. They would all add up to the wisdom I heard in a YouTube video in a class I took this summer. Father Gregory Boyle is a Jesuit priest who works with gang members in Los Angeles and is the founder of Homeboy Industries, a social enterprise that rehabilitates violent gang members. It's the largest ministry of its kind in North America. Boyle says, we have forgotten that we belong to each other. There is no kingdom if someone is standing outside the circle. Sin is the lie that some lives matter less than others. Do you hear the 7 deadly sins in that? Pride, envy, gluttony, lust, anger, greed, sloth. Sin is the lie that some lives matter less than others. The good news is the Christian gospel is this, that when you confess that, when you lay that, I actually lived that lie. In the very next breath, you can begin again. That's the Christian good news. And here's the piece that makes us crazy, drives us nuts. Brett Kavanaugh's life is not less than Christy Ford's. Donald Trump's life is not less than Hillary Clinton's. Rachel Notley's life is not less than John Horgan's. From God's perspective, Richard Bailey's life is not less than mine. You may not live your life believing that any life is less than yours. And here's the other thing. It gets better. For those people living in the self-hatred of addictions and self-loathing and depression, anger turned inward, you don't get to live your life believing that your life is less than anyone else's. Friends, we have to get this right. We have to get this right for the healing of the earth and for God's kingdom coming. May God help us as we do that. May God help us if we don't. Can I get an amen here? Amen. Please pray with me. Holy God, in story, we remember the words when we arrive in this place. You are my beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. When that's true for us, it's true for everyone else. Confession lets us start again. The game changes in that confession. And it must, for the sake of something greater than ourselves. May the truth of the gospel live in our hearts for the healing of your world.